morning. My name is Dr. Michael Reardon. I'm one of the cardiac surgeons here. I'd like to welcome you to Grand Rounds. Some introductory stuff first. Before we introduce the speaker, this is a video conference with taping. We will broadcast this live via LiveStream, Facebook, and YouTube. Please use the microphones for your questions so it can be picked up for the streaming. The webcast is always available for viewing. You should consider subscribing to the YouTube channel to get notifications about when videos are added. And this year we'll be live broadcasting our post-Grand Rounds interview. Dr. Mack will be interviewed by Dr. Atkins. Dr. Mack, as you know, has been a leader in TAVR, so it's going to be a great interview. And that will go live at 9 o'clock. If you want to submit a question, there's flyers in the back, and the panel will open at 9. We have two other conferences, the second annual Critical Care Conference, January 18th, and the 5th annual Houston Heart Summit Conference on the 7th. And at noontime, we'll be having the DeBakey lecture about Selma and Louise DeBakey, so I hope you all can make that conference also. This morning conference is Dr. Michael Mack, a longtime friend of mine. Dr. Mack has been a practicing cardiac surgeon since 1982. He's board certified in internal medicine, general surgery, and cardiothoracic surgery. He's currently the director of cardiovascular service line for Baylor Scott & White, chair of the Baylor Scott & White Cardiovascular Governance Council, chair of the board of Scott & White Research, director of the cardiovascular research at the Heart Hospital, Baylor Plano. Mike has what says over 650 reviewed publications. I can't believe it's not more than that, Mike, because every time I turn around, you're publishing some other great paper.
600 are with you.
Yeah, well, yeah. Thank you. I wouldn't have him if I wasn't working with you. He's also the senior vice chair of the Cardiothoracic Surgery Network, where we get a lot of our great randomized trials of the NIH, associate editor of the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, as well as a member of the ACC nominating committee, the governance committee, innovations work group, and he co-chairs the STS ACC TVT registry, stakeholder advisory group, as a member of the FDA MD EpiNet advisory committee. He's also the director of the American Board of Thoracic Surgery. If I keep reading all of this, Michael, you're not going to have any time to give us our talks. I'll just say that Mike has been a leader in not only open surgery, but in transcatheter surgery. Michael is a master surgeon, a innovator par excellence, a good person, and a good friend. And I want you to join me in welcoming Mike to the south end of I-45. So Michael Mack, we're looking forward to you.
Thanks, Michael, for that wonderful introduction. All that really means is that I'm really, really old. And the first time I was ever in Houston, that's exactly what I was told. I-45 is a one-way street from Dallas to Houston. Nothing ever goes back, so, including patients. So it's an honor to be here, and particularly to give the Michael DeBakey lectureship. I only met Dr. DeBakey once, and that was in this picture, and this is after his operation. And I must say, as you'll see in the next couple of slides, it was an honor for me to be able to have that moment to meet him, because he was always one of my heroes and a major influence as to why I went into medicine. So this is my conflict of interest disclosure. I do have industry relationships as in the leadership of a number of trials. Unfortunately, all of these are uncompensated. So as Shakespeare said in The Tempest, whereof what is past is prologue, if we're going to look to the future, we have to look to the past. So I'm going to talk about cardiac surgery, where we have been, where are we now, and where we're going, and how to get to wherever that is. So this was the penultimate time, I would say, in cardiac surgery. I remember being in college during this time and seeing the covers of Life magazine and Time magazine about what was happening in Houston and around the world. So the first human heart transplant. And then I remember very vividly this Time magazine cover of Dr. DeBakey. Surgeons were our national heroes on the covers of our lay press. and you never quite know what influences make you make the decisions you do in life. But looking back on this, clearly the profile of Houston and Dr. DeBakey and Dr. Cooley clearly influenced the decisions I made in terms of life and career. The first total artificial heart, and then even the disputes made the cover of Life magazine in the 1960s. So cardiac surgery has an incredible legacy. And that's the foundation of what got us where we are today. However, as this quote says, learning and innovation go hand in hand. The arrogance of success is to think that what you did yesterday will be sufficient for tomorrow. One of the presidential addresses for one of the surgical societies I remember very vividly, and it was in Toronto in the year 2000, and it was by Toby Cosgrove of the Cleveland Clinic. And there's many memorable quotes in this presidential address, but one of them is, the thing that we fear most is change. And that what we did yesterday is going to be good enough for tomorrow. So I got involved in innovation a number of ways that I'm going to go through, and I'm more focused on the general principles of innovation and how it happens rather than specifics per se. But I am going to use the examples of two of the transcatheter valve trials as case studies as to how innovation happens. So one of my colleagues and mentors, I would say, is Frederick Moore, who is the chief of heart surgery in Leipzig, Germany. And when the wall came down in Germany, he moved from West Germany to East Germany and built the largest cardiac surgery program in the world in Leipzig. And we became very close colleagues during that period of time. But innovation, he said, is 1% inspiration and 99% commitment. And I'll show a couple examples of how that's true. So this on the right is Albert Starr, and on the left is Lowell Edwards. And Lowell Edwards was a engineer working on fuel injection for bombers in World War II. And they had a problem with valves in the fuel pump, so he reached out to Albert Starr, and they worked together and developed the first heart valve in 1960. This gentleman, Alain Carpentier, developed the first biologic heart valve in 1965. They both received the Lasker Award at the same time for innovation in medicine. What are these gentlemen doing today? So this is Professor Carpentier at age 85 working on his total artificial heart, CARMAT, that has now been placed in 17 humans and will come to the United States in early feasibility trials early next year. He's as engaged in this at 85 as he was in the development of the biologic valve. This is Albert Starr, 59 years later, at age 90. He's building his total artificial heart also. So if there's ever two individuals that were innovators that have demonstrated the idea of 99% commitment, it's these two individuals. So Professor Moore's other principles of innovation are as follows. One is you have to have a clear goal. Two, you have to have a pioneering spirit and curiosity. Thirdly, you got to have the courage of your convictions. You have to be motivated and have a strong will. Experience helps, and so does endurance. Trust yourself and your team. Prepare well and train well. surround yourself with people who are better than you are. And I think that's one of the biggest faults that we all have, is not surrounding ourselves with people that are better than us. Share credits and rewards. Face the competition head on and don't minimize it. Support your team around you, and have the honesty to report and discuss failures. I remember very well in the late 1990s, and Michael, I'm sure, remembers this also, when Professor Moore pioneered minimally invasive heart surgery and reported it at an American surgical meeting in 1997. And there were 2 young patients that died after mitral valve surgery because of complications of the new procedure. And he was roundly criticized in public for this. And, his response was, I wanted to tell you all what our experience was so that nobody else in the world would ever have to go through what we went through. And from that day, you knew you could believe everything that came out of Leipzig, Germany, because they reported their results honestly and were very transparent about it. So I would say I had 3 so-called epiphanies of innovation that kind of opened my eyes as to how we should always think about doing things differently. And one was in 1989, one in 1999, and then the years between 2000 and 2002. So first, 1989, the principle I learned is that cross-fertilization is key. And we were just talking before this about the Pump and Pipes initiative, with Alan, that a lot of the oil field technology can be transferred to medicine. Well, the cross-fertilization for me was in general surgery. And so this is a private practice general surgeon in Tennessee named Eddie Joe Reddick. And at a gynecology meeting in Augusta, Georgia, he met a gynecologist named, or a general surgeon named Barry McKernan, and a gynecologist, William Say, for drinks. And I guess you got to have alcohol to think of this stuff, but the trio discussed the possibility of removing a gallbladder laparoscopically. And this is a surgeon in our hospital that I had trained with at the time by the name of Ron Aronoff. And he grabs me in the hallway one day and says, you need to come in and look at see these lap choles that we're doing. So laparoscopic cholecystectomy is a fact of life now, but at the time it was so counterintuitive. He said you can actually put a scope in and see the gallbladder better on a television screen, better than you can see it open. And at the time I said, how can you ever see something better than have an incision with the gallbladder right there? And sure enough, you walk into the room and there's the gallbladder as big of life and better than you could ever see it open. So that was my introduction to minimally invasive and laparoscopic surgery. And a number of those principles have influenced everything I've done since then. This was my first scientific publication that was in 1992, and it had to do with thoracoscopy, or taking the laparoscopic principles to the chest. And it's what got me to China for the first time, and has kept me in China for the next 25 years ever since then, of starting thoracoscopy in China. And this is the 20-year anniversary of over 200,000 cases of thoracoscopic procedures in China. It also got me into the world of spine surgery. And I knew absolutely nothing about spine surgery, but one of the things that we discovered when we started putting scopes in the chest, how well you could see the spine. So we collaborated with our spine surgeons to develop some techniques of endoscopic disc replacement procedures. So the lessons that I learned from these other specialties of general surgery, spine surgery, and urology and gynecology very definitely helped influence the way that I do things. The second epiphany was 1999, and what does baseball have to do with surgery? Well, in baseball, as we know, the tie goes to the runner. In procedural medicine, when you have two options and the outcomes are the same, the less invasive procedure always beats the more invasive procedure because it's preferred by patients and their referring physicians. So even though you may have a tie, the less invasive procedure always wins. And that is operative in terms of transcatheter aortic valve replacement and surgical aortic valve replacement. If a less invasive procedure is roughly equal to or non-inferior to a more invasive conventional procedure, then it becomes superior to it in the hearts and minds of patients and referring physicians. And so I'll use the outcomes of TAVR trials in the United States that both Michael and I were participants in. And if you look at high-risk patients in which patients were randomized to surgery and TAVR, TAVR was non-inferior to surgery. What's the preferred approach to replace an aortic valve in high-risk surgical patients now? TAVR. In intermediate-risk patients, the trial showed that TAVR was non-inferior to surgery. What's the preferred approach? TAVR. And now we've just had trials of low-risk patients in which TAVR was either superior to or non-inferior to surgery. And what's becoming the preferred approach in low-risk patients? TAVR. So even though the results are a tie, the less invasive procedure wins out. Also around that time in 1999, I went to the cath lab for the first time. And learned wire skills as a cardiac surgeon from my interventional cardiology, our chief of interventional cardiology here. And if you ever want to understand how another person thinks, walk in their shoes. And if you walk in your shoes, it is an eye-opener in many ways. And this led to this publication in 2001. This was the millennial issue of JAMA, in which they asked a number of authors to predict what medicine was going to be in the next 1,000 years. And I wasn't asked to be an author on this. A surgeon, Robert Guyton, was, to talk about minimally invasive and robotic surgery. This was prediction of AIDS, rheumatic fever, all disease, diabetes, everything affects mankind, and this was about surgery. So Robert Guyton declined, said that he didn't feel qualified to do it, and referred them to me. Well, I wasn't qualified to do it either, but I didn't decline. But I reached out to a number of experts around me and said I can try to figure this out. So I reached out to the laparoscopic, general surgeons, which had become strongly laparoscopic at the time, orthopedic surgeons, spine surgeons, urologists that were doing robotics, plastic surgeons, ENT surgeons, industry. If you ever want to know where anything's go, just follow the money. Finding out what industry was investing in, and then the investment community, from angel funders to venture capital folks, et cetera. And to this day, this is the most important article to me that I have ever written. And the future of surgery, there were four principles that came through again and again and again. And the first one was ablation over excision. We wouldn't be cutting out tumors. We would be ablating them rather than excising them. Image guided over direct vision. As surgeons, we're always used to looking down and looking directly at what we see, and the world was going to move to image-guided over direct vision. The third is reconstruction without suturing. The most difficult thing to do by a minimally invasive approach is place stitches. So it would be alternatives to rebuild tissue and organs in the body without having to suture them. And then the fourth thing is access via a natural orifice or blood vessel over an incision. And I was just at the American College of Surgeons meeting last month, and I walked in and there's this big poster talking about transoral thyroidectomy. Now, I'm not sure how much sense that makes, but showing that if you go through a natural orifice or a blood vessel over incision, that is the way that the world is coming. But anyway, looking at these 4 principles, in 2002, the first TAVR procedure happens. And I, in my wildest dreams in 2000 and 2001, never would have dreamed of TAVR. Yet 3 of these 4 principles were embodied in TAVR. You replace an aortic valve without looking at it, just using image guidance. You've got to surely have to stitch an aortic valve in place for it to hold. Well, no, you don't. And putting it in through a blood vessel over an incision. Again, 3 of these 4 principles, and at the time that I solicited all this input from all these specialties, none of the idea of TAVR, it was in some people's mind, but surely not mine at that time. The third epiphany was between the years 2000 and 2002. The epitomizes the idea of thinking outside the box. So I'll ask this question: who invented TAVR and when? And this is an example, one of the 2 examples of how innovation happens. So I know there's a number of people in the room that know the answer to this, but everybody thinks that it's Alain Crebier, who is a French cardiologist that did the first transcatheter aortic valve replacement. Well, it wasn't. The actual invention happened long before that by this guy, the guy on the left, not the guy on the right. And his name was Henning Anderson, who is a Danish cardiologist. And this is the idea of cross-fertilization again. He went to a endovascular surgery meeting by Ted Dietrich in Scottsdale, Arizona, in the 1980s, and just the time that endovascular treatment of abdominal aortic disease was coming into place, and learning about stents, and said, why can't you put a valve inside one of those stents? So this is a back of the napkin story. You always hear about these inventions that are scribbled out on a napkin and then turned into intellectual property. Well, literally on the plane from Phoenix back to Copenhagen, on the back of a napkin, sketched out the drawings that turned into this patent in 1995 when it was finally issued for transcatheter aortic valve replacements. And these were the drawings of these first initial valves and delivery systems that he got from attending an endovascular surgery meeting and thinking about it on an airplane. And he went back home, and this is arguably the first heart team approach in structural heart disease, because he went to the operating room and got stainless steel surgical wires that we use for to close sternums with after open heart surgery. And I'm sorry, this mouse is lost, but the stent is made out of surgical stainless steel wires. He crimped them in a crimper in his garage, and then sewed a valve in. Now, the way you can tell this is done by a cardiologist is there's no surgeon that would be proud of those knots by any means. But this was the first TAVR valve that was fashioned, and then he went to the cath lab and got an in-away balloon used for balloon mitral valvuloplasties, mounted it on it, and performed the first TAVR experiment in an animal in 1989. Like so many things in life, success does not happen right away, and the world rejects some of your ideas. This is the Journal of the American College of Cardiology in 1990 that rejected his first animal experience, that the overall rating is too low a priority for publication in JACC. So it was left till a poster presentation at the European Society of Cardiology in 1992 for the first TAVR results to be published publicly. And this is a young Dr. Anderson standing by his poster at the European Society meeting. And it's eerily similar to me as this poster of Andreas Grunzig in 1977 at the American Heart Association, presenting the first experience with percutaneous treatment of coronary artery disease. And it's interesting that two seminal treatments in the field of interventional procedures on the heart were both minor poster presentations at major meetings. So this led to the first TAVR procedure in humans in 2002. We got involved in 2004 in Leipzig, Germany, because these are procedures that, due to regulatory barriers, you couldn't perform in the United States at the time. So this is Professor Moore in Germany, and for those of you that know about Goethe and Faust, it was written in the basement beer halls in Leipzig, Germany. And Mephistopheles still roams the beer halls today. And so we made a deal with the devil to develop a surgical approach to this at the time, and that devil was Alain Cribier, the cardiologist that did the first one, that partnered with us as surgeons to get us involved in the field and help move it forward. So this story comes full circle. So 22 years after he had the idea for a transcatheter valve, this patient got a TAVR procedure. So why is that significant? Well, this is Dr. Anderson's father. And how often in life do you invent something that your own family member actually benefits from? So I've always thought that this is a very touching story about how an innovative new idea actually benefits somebody close to you. So it seems like we're undergoing a revolution in TAVR at the current time. With these low-risk trials, there's a virtual total paradigm shift from surgery to transcatheter treatment of aortic stenosis. But if you look back at this timeline that I just constructed here, it's actually 31 years from the original idea in 1988, with the first animal in 1989, the first human in 2002, approval in Europe in 2007, limited approval in the United States in 2012, and now there were 63,000 performed in the United States last year, and it's estimated that there'll be 75,000 this year. So it seems like it's a revolution, but in point of fact, it was more evolution than revolution, and all the background persistence and commitment that it took to get to this seemingly revolutionary point today. So this is the number of TAVR procedures in the United States, and with 63,000 performed last year. This is TAVR versus isolated surgical aortic valve replacement in the United States, the proportion done by each approach. And you can see that although there's numerically only a slight decrease in the number of surgical procedures, proportionately, 3 out of 4 procedures now will be performed by a transcatheter approach. And this looks eerily similar to what's happened for the treatment of abdominal aortic aneurysms in the first decade after the introduction of the endovascular treatment of abdominal aortic aneurysms. You can see that there's a total virtual shift from a totally open procedure to a totally endovascular procedure over that decade. And as Alan Lumsden was just saying last night, the average trainee now in vascular surgery gets to experience, what, 2 to 3 open abdominal aortic procedures during the course of their training. The second story has to do with MitraClip, which is a transcatheter treatment for mitral regurgitation. So this is who invented the MitraClip. If anybody in the room knows, you can shout it out. Mehmet Oz, correct. Another back of the napkin story. So this is the patents for the MitraClip device, and you can see the lead patent holder is Mehmet Oz. Although he's the lead patent holder, he worked for Columbia University at the time, And so Columbia is actually receives all the they receive a royalty from every MitraClip that's placed today. So, you know, if Dr. Oz wasn't an employee of Columbia, he'd be receiving it, but I don't think we have to feel bad that Dr. Oz is missing out on royalties from MitraClip. But anyway, he went, and this is the initial drawings that came from literally a back of a napkin. So what Mehmet did was went to a meeting in Europe to learn about what's called the Alfieri procedure, this is Octavio Alfieri, an Italian surgeon in Milan, who, as a bailout procedure when he couldn't successfully repair a valve, performed an edge-to-edge technique with stitches. So Dr. Oz heard about this, went to visit Dr. Alfieri at his institution to see him do this, and then put the idea of a transcatheter approach using a clip, drew it out on a napkin, and filed for those patents. And this is another 20-year saga of the first idea that was drawn out on a napkin in 1998 to where we were when a large pivotal trial was presented last year that has led to FDA approval for all types of mitral regurgitation in high-risk patients at the current time. But it was a 20-year timeline from the initial idea to the commercial reality that it is today. And this, after this trial was presented at one of the cardiology meetings, this was a text that I got from Mehmet Oz, who didn't even know it was being presented at the time. It was on a Sunday morning. And I remember writing the patent on a flight home from Italy, where Alfieri had just presented his initial results with open repair in 1996. After all the early effort to solve numerous puzzles in an innovative approach, the New England Journal article is a dream come true. What I got out of it was I got to go on the Dr. Oz show and see how it's really done. That is an education in itself. None of it's spontaneous, it's all scripted. So innovation is all about creating value. Now, value is defined as outcome over cost, and not necessarily financial cost, but the cost that a patient incurs by having a procedure performed, and that can be complications, invasiveness, et cetera. So the way to increase value is to either improve the outcome or decrease the cost, or preferably both. So how to increase value in surgery? Well, you can get better outcomes. You can have it either be higher quality or less invasive or more cost effective. You can make it easier to perform. And indeed, I think that's one of the magic of a lot of the transcatheter procedures performed on the heart, is that the device is replacing technique and making the procedures more user-friendly. You can do it faster, so you can take less time to do the procedure and have the patients recover quicker, or you can make it safer. So these are all parameters as how to increase value in surgery. As Einstein says, everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. So the magic is knowing when you reach that point. So one of the surgeons I have always admired is a surgeon in the Bay Area called Vince Gaudiani. He's a true master surgeon that could do the most complex procedures you can imagine. And and he has been involved in the TAVR trials, and I asked him, if there was ever a surgeon that was going to be resistant to these changes that were happening, I thought it would be Dr. Gaudiani. So I asked him his thoughts about all this. And what I'm going to share is a couple quotes from him that I thought are very insightful. If you have to be a master surgeon to perform an operation, then the operation is not widely adoptable nor of significant value. And he talks about what he calls big case surgery. So it's Whipple procedures, radical mastectomies, open abdominal aortic aneurysms, circulatory arrest arches, open esophagectomy. And he says the decline of big case surgery began before we started training. It was always the product of an age in which it was developed, and that age has passed, and it will continue to decline. Big case surgery are operations that depend heavily on the technique of the operator. They are complex, life-endangering, and perhaps most important, the physiologic consequences of the procedure are major. These operations are the consequence of a particular moment in the history of science. The device part of this revolution reduced the necessity for technique by building more of the solution into the technology. Technique would remain important, but far less so than it was with surgical solutions. Therefore, the outcomes are more dependent on the device than they are on the technical ability of the operator. This will all happen faster if we decide to train people in a more organized way. The current status of training is similar to the rubrics of 50 years ago. We need to totally revamp and plan training to achieve surgeons who will replace us. So this is an example of that. This is a left internal mammary artery to the left anterior descending and a stent to the LAD. We know which of those procedures provides better long-term survival, a lima to the LAD. But what has become the preferred treatment for it? A stent to the LAD, because it is widely adoptable and able to be done on an outpatient basis by the majority of cardiologists and the majority of patients. So this was a quote from Denton Cooley. The worst thing that happened to me was the invention of the heart-lung machine, because then any pedestrian surgeon could do heart surgery. So it is a comment that, the easier you make things, the more widely adoptable that it is, and the less that you need master surgeons. So the basic marketing 101 principles of any medical device salesperson, they're taught three things. The drivers of adoption are: have a strong evidence base. The procedure or the device should be user-friendly, not patient-friendly, but user-friendly. If you're getting an operator out of their comfort zone, they're never going to adopt it. And thirdly, it has to be teachable. And again, we'll come back to this idea of TAVR, of these three principles and why it's been widely adopted. There's an absolutely robust evidence base of benefit compared to the standard of care. So over 12 years, there have been 9 trials that have enrolled almost 10,000 patients, of which 8,000 have been randomized. It's the most studied medical device in the history of mankind. And there's very clear black and white results, which I think has accelerated the adoptability of the procedure. And if you have two procedures, the one on the left, TAVR, or the one on the right, surgical aortic valve replacement, which is more teachable and which is more user-friendly to a wider number of practitioners? And it's clearly the TAVR procedure. So the TAVR procedure embraces all three of those principles. So as surgeons, we are always resistant to change because we think we do a great job on things. But anytime change happens, and change is inevitable in anything that we do, you have a number of options as to how you're going to face change. The first is you can throw stones at it. You can say, we've got a great operation, why do we need to do anything different than we've done before? Or you can stand on the sidelines and watch the world pass you by. And I've always felt that you can't influence how a game is played unless you're in the game. It doesn't do any good to stand on the sidelines. You can put your head in the sand and pretend that it's not happening. You can fall asleep and let the world pass you by. If you fall asleep on the railroad tracks, there's only one thing that's going to happen. You're going to get run over by that train, and then you're going to be chasing it to try to catch up and get on board that train. Or you can get in the game and try to influence it. And I apologize for putting a Dallas Cowboy picture up here in Houston. But at least we got a good receiver that knows how to play the game. We just don't have a coach. So this is this is in the early stages of structural heart disease that I wrote this editorial in one of the surgical journals. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. A perspective on the emerging field of percutaneous heart valve therapy. So I saw what happened to the world of percutaneous intervention in coronary artery disease, and it took a microsecond, as it did for Michael, to connect the dots here that the same thing was going to happen in structural heart disease. So both of us decided that we'd be involved in the game, and I think it was a great career decisions for both of us. So this is the way that healthcare delivery used to happen. However, this is what's happening today and in the future of healthcare delivery. This is what's happening in Texas now. This is a slide from the CEO of our healthcare system that actually was trying to merge with Memorial Hermann here in Houston that fell apart about 6 months ago for reasons I still don't know. You know, everybody's getting involved in healthcare, and it's going to impact humongously what we're going to do, from Aetna to CV Health to Walmart. Walmart just hired away our chief of HR to head up Walmart Health now. But everybody's involved in healthcare delivery with huge healthcare systems. Private equity is involved. There's very few dermatology practices that aren't owned by private equity partners at the current time. And then, as we all know, Google, Amazon, and Apple are all very involved in healthcare, and it's going to impact us significantly. We can downplay it, and it doesn't seem like it today, but remember the early days of TAVR and kind of what's happened since. The same thing's going to happen to all aspects of healthcare. So if we just look at what's happening with the digital revolution and how it's going to affect surgery and interventional cardiology, I think there's two areas. You know, big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning are clearly going to be the answer to everything. I mean, you got a problem, AI is going to solve it. But I'm going to give examples of how I think it is going to actually help us. I don't see autonomous robots doing surgery in the foreseeable future by any means, but there is a lot of areas where machine learning is going to help. And then I think wearables are clearly the future. So a number of medical people in this field have stopped reading the Harvard Business Review and started reading Nature Machine Intelligence as a way of figuring out how big data is going to influence medicine. The way I think it's going to influence surgery is as follows. I think it's going to give better risk prediction than we have had in the past as to what the potential outcomes of the procedure are, as well as what procedures should be performed based upon strong evidence base that you can only use machine learning to really analyze what those outcomes are. It's going to lead to cost optimization in terms of procedures. It's going to be treatment benefit prediction. And lastly, it's going to be postoperative management. I think so much of what happens postoperatively now can be totally automated and totally construct algorithms to manage care, be it blood sugars afterwards or need for transfusion, things like that. I think postoperative management is going to be a very strong influence in machine learning. We know now that using machine learning, you can read a pathology specimen better than you can using a physician to be able to do it. This is the latest in echocardiography. This is Caption Health, in which you can use a nurse at the bedside, put a probe on the chest, and the machine tells you whether the probe's in the right place, whether you're at the right angle or not. And when it is, if you're not at the right angle or at the right place, it tells you where to move it to. And when you get at the right place, it will interpret the echo for you. So right now, it's highly refined and 99% accurate without a sonographer and without an echocardiographer for ejection fraction and for pericardial effusion. And this is only going to get better and better as time goes on. This is the Apple Heart Study using a digital wearable that was presented at the American College of Cardiology in the springtime. 400,000 patients all consented for a trial through their Apple Watch, enrolled in the trial and determined the incidence of atrial fibrillation in a healthy population. That was highly accurate. It also sets a new way that trials are going to be done in the future. They enrolled 400,000 patients in a trial in 7 months, all consented, fully informed consent, all done through the Apple Watch. And it was published yesterday in the New England Journal of Medicine. So this is going to set the stage not only for wearables, but for the way clinical trials are going to be done in the future. If you don't know about IoT or the Internet of Things, this is basically every medical device and every database that captures information, patient information on any individual can be connected to every other device or individual through the cloud. So it's just almost mind-boggling the possibilities that exist with this. So these are current wearables, the physiologic parameters that can be measured either by your Apple Watch or by a sensor on your finger or a ring or a contact lens that has a chip in it. You can measure heart rate, you can measure heart rhythm, you can measure oxygen saturation. Blood pressure was the holy grail. Now that can be solved. We can know patients' blood pressure every second of the day, sleeping or awake. I mean, just think of what that's going to do to hypertension trials in the future. It can measure photoplethysmography and determine tissue perfusion, blood sugars, and you can actually count medications that patients are treating. You can measure tissue water, patient's weight, their activity levels, so that as a patient's discharged from the hospital after a procedure, you'll know anything you want to know about a patient and how they're doing at any point in time. This is going to have a profound impact on post-procedural care. So if we look around us, it's incredible the innovation that's happened over the last 20 years. The largest retailer in the world owns no stores, Amazon. The largest taxi company in the world, Uber, owns no cars. The largest hotelier in the world owns no hotel rooms, and the largest news sources employ no reporters. So innovation is happening in the blink of the eye around us. But one of the lessons is when you look at new technology, there are two stages. You have a disruptive technology or a breakthrough, but you should never make the decision as to whether there's value in that disruption until you see the sustaining technology or refinements that happen afterwards. So a couple examples of that. Good enough for our transatlantic friends, but unworthy of the attention of practical scientific men was the British Parliament's initial assessment of the light bulb in 1878. Television won't last because people will soon get tired of staring at a plywood box every night. And I remember this very vividly in USA Today. Wireless net, so far wowless. USA Today panned the internet, said it was never going to be anything because all the refinements hadn't happened to it, such as speed, user interface, etc. The initial airplanes weren't too successful. And now we have autonomous driving cars. Who's betting against Uber and Google here? It's going to happen. There have been bumps in the road. It's going to happen sooner rather than later. And who really doubts that drones are going to be delivering packages to your house within the next 5 years? So could we turn up the sound on this?
Optimism.
Larry, I'll tell you a short story. When I went into practice in 1982, the first generation surgeon that I joined in the hospital was of Dr. Isom's generation, said that all cardiovascular research has already been done. There's nothing to invent. I'm now at that stage in my career that I'm 61 and facing retirement in the foreseeable future.
That was
I don't
10
wanna
years ago.
retire. I'm afraid I'm going to miss something. This percutaneous valve stuff that Dr. Fontana was talking about a little bit ago is the most exciting thing I've seen. So On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm somewhere between 10 and 11. All the other problems notwithstanding.
I'll tell you, Abraham Lincoln once proposed closing the patent office because all inventions had been invented.
So I was an intern in internal medicine at the University of Minnesota in 1973. Acute MIs had a 1-month hospital stay because there was nothing to do about them. Surgical hip operations took 6 weeks to recovery. There was no such thing as a knee replacement. Acute leukemia was universally fatal. Gallbladders, it took 6 weeks to recover from surgery and get back to work. Heart transplants had gone from headlines to abandonment. There was no field of interventional cardiology at the time, and heart valve surgery was rare, and I looked like this. Fast forward 46 years later, mortality from heart disease has declined by 50%. Total hip replacements are routine. Bilateral total knees can be done as an outpatient procedure. Most leukemia is now cured. Lap chole is an outpatient procedure. Heart transplant and VADs are now routine, and now you can get your heart valve replaced and go home the same day afterwards. And I got a haircut. So the final word, there's nothing more difficult to manage, more dubious of success than to initiate a new order of things. The innovator has enemies in all those who profit from the old order, and only lukewarm defenders in all those who would profit from the new order. And that was said by none other than Machiavelli. So, as Jack Welch said, control your own destiny or somebody else will. And again, I would like to acknowledge Dr. DeBakey and his legacy and the contributions that he has made to the field of the treatment of heart disease. I very much enjoyed meeting his son Dennis, who's here in the front row, last night at dinner. And it's like I said, it was his influence, although he didn't know it, on the cover of Time magazine that influenced the career decisions and choices that I made. And again, this was the one time that I had the opportunity to meet him in my life, and it was truly a memorable moment for me. So again, it's been an honor for me to be here, and thank you. I very much appreciate it.
Stay up here for 1 minute. Well, Dennis, I don't think you could have had better tribute to your dad than that particular presentation. That was phenomenal and very stimulating. So we got a few minutes for questions. Please put your hand up, and if there's questions, speak into the microphone. Robert, first of all, Robert deserves a lot of credit. Dr. Jackson for organizing the DeBakey, Michael DeBakey and the Lewis and Selma DeBakey lecture. This is a combined lecture. Thank you again, Robert.
Thank you. Dr. Mack, what an outstanding lecture and a view of history. What's going to happen to the doctor-patient relationship in the future with all of this technology and innovation?
Well, the doctor-patient relationship is clearly going to change, and it's changed already. The value from a patient side of the personal interaction with the physician is going to be diminished significantly, whether we like it or not. Whether it's walking into a minute clinic in the CVS pharmacy, or whether it's getting a consult, over the internet, by a faceless entity that you don't know, it is going to be the future. The whole idea is going to be accessibility, and cost is going to trump that relationship. Like it or not, I think that is what's happening.
Thank you. Mike.
Well, Michael, listen, thank you for an outstanding lecture. Great as always. A comment and a question. The comment was you said to Larry when you were 61, you were pretty excited to go on. I remember Bud Frazier came over and gave a lecture on VADs when Dr. DeBakey was 95. And at the end, Dr. DeBakey invited Bud up to the office and said, Bud, I really want to work on this with you. And Bud said, Dr. DeBakey, it's going to take about 10 years. He goes, yeah, that's okay. And so at 95, he was still looking excited and looking forward. And the question is, as we move down this road, cardiology and heart surgery seem to be getting closer and closer. Do you ever see it as a single field where the longer you train, the more invasive you become?
Yeah, I think the lines are clearly blurring today with this heart team approach. There is an initiative that Michael knows about that there are structural heart fellowships now. And the boards and the professional societies are creating a single structural heart fellowship open to cardiologists and surgeons so that you can come into the structural fellowship year, whether you're a cardiologist or surgeon, and come out as a structural interventionalist. Now, you know, clearly there are going to be some differences in skill sets. You wouldn't expect a cardiac surgeon to come out and put in a left main stent, just like you wouldn't expect a cardiologist to do an open aortic root replacement. But there will be overlap and mergers of probably about 80% of what we do. So yes, I think that hybrid structural interventionalist is becoming more and more a reality.
Any other questions? One of the things I learned from your presentation was I didn't realize Anderson got his inspiration at Ted Dietrich's meeting. So you knew where Ted Dietrich was before going to the ROs on the heart.
Well, I know he's in Houston.
He was right here and worked with Dr. DeBakey before. And how, one of the most amazing, how he made that transition from this organization, which was about big, open surgery, to go into what he did at Arizona Heart and inspiring a lot of us, actually. That's really how I got into the minimally invasive world. So if there are no final questions, we'll stop at that. And again, just thanks on behalf of everybody. That was a truly inspiring talk. Appreciate it very much. That was awesome. Really good. Thank you. Thank you.